the real reason why these actors left the Love Boat. For 9 seasons, the Love Boat sailed into American living rooms every Saturday night, promising sunshine, string bikinis, and a happy ending for every guest star who stepped aboard the Pacific Princess. But here's what a postcard version of the show never showed you. Before that friendly crew ever set foot on deck, network executives fired an entire cast, not once, but twice. A leading man was let go for being too good-looking. A television dad walked off the gangplank on purpose. And the show's most beloved star was quietly pushed out the door while fighting for her life. This is the real story of who left the Love Boat and why the official reasons rarely matched what was actually happening behind the scenes. Let's start with the exit that still stings the most. Lauren Tews played Cruise director Julie McCoy from the very first episode in 1977, and for 7 seasons she was, in a lot of ways, the emotional center of the entire show. She was 23 years old when she landed the role, fresh off waitressing jobs and small guest spots, and almost overnight, she became one of the most recognizable faces on American television. What audiences didn't know was that not long after she got the job, Tews tried cocaine for the first time on her way to a party, and she later admitted she did it because she desperately wanted to feel like she belonged. The habit didn't stay contained to her personal life for long. She has said openly in interviews that the more money she made from the show, the more of it disappeared into her addiction, and that she was falling asleep on set and struggling to keep up with the demands of a hit series. By 1980, she recognized she had a serious problem and began working with a counselor to get sober, cutting back gradually until she stopped using entirely. But her past had already caught up with her reputation. In 1984, executive producer Douglas Kramer made the decision to fire her, even though, by her own account and her castmates' accounts, she was already in recovery by that point. Fred Grandy, who played Gopher alongside her for years, has since said publicly that he regrets not standing up for her more forcefully when it happened, calling it a business where plenty of people were using substances in one way or another, and admitting that Tews seemed to bear a disproportionate share of the consequences. Tews herself has said she believes she was treated more harshly because addiction in a woman was judged very differently in that era than it would be handled today. She did return for guest appearances in the show's final seasons and got her life back on track, eventually stepping away from Hollywood to build a career as a chef. But her sudden removal from the show that made her famous remains one of the most talked about departures in the entire history of the Love Boat. Then there's Fred Grandy, whose exit could not have looked more different. Grandy played the purser Burl Gopher Smith for the better part of a decade, running around the deck in knee socks and getting flustered by every attractive guest star who boarded the ship. What most fans didn't realize while they were laughing at Gopher's antics is that Grandy had wanted a career in politics since long before he ever wanted a career in acting. He'd gone to Phillips Exeter Academy, where he happened to room with David Eisenhower, grandson of the former president, and he graduated from Harvard with a degree in English. Long before the Love Boat made him a star, he'd already worked as a speechwriter for an Iowa congressman. So when the seat for Iowa's 6th congressional district opened up in 1986, Grandy didn't hesitate. He asked the show's producers to release him from his contract so he could go home to Sioux City and run, and they agreed, writing Gopher out by having the character take a hotel management job on a Pacific island. Plenty of political insiders assumed voters would never take a sitcom star seriously, and Grandy leaned into the joke himself rather than running from it. He won anyway, and went on to serve 4 terms in the House of Representatives, sitting on the Ways and Means Committee among others, before later making an unsuccessful run for governor of Iowa. He'd go on to lead Goodwill Industries and host his own political radio show. Grandy is proof that not every departure from the Love Boat was a tragedy. Sometimes an actor simply had somewhere else he'd rather be. Before any of the actors' audiences came to know and love ever set foot on the Pacific Princess, there was an entirely different pilot and an entirely different cast, and this is where things get genuinely strange. The Love Boat started life as a 1976 made-for-TV movie based on a memoir by a real cruise director named Geraldine Saunders. In that original pilot, the captain wasn't Gavin MacLeod at all. It was a strikingly handsome Australian actor named Ted Hamilton, playing a character called Captain Thomas Allenford III. By most accounts, he was a genuinely good actor with real screen presence, and on paper, Casting a leading man as the captain of a floating romance anthology seems like an obvious move. But according to entertainment writer Jim Colucci, who covered the show's history for a CW documentary series, the president of ABC was furious after watching the test footage, and for a reason nobody expected. His argument was that the entire concept of the show depended on ordinary passengers falling for the rotating cast of weekly guest stars, not for the captain steering the ship. If the man in the captain's uniform looked like a magazine cover model, viewers would be far too busy fantasizing about him to care about anyone else's romance for that week. In other words, Hamilton was let go from what would become one of the biggest hits of the era for the bizarre crime of being too attractive for the format to function. ABC didn't pick the show up after that first pilot at all, and Hamilton never got a second shot at the role. The part eventually landed with Gavin MacLeod, whose warmer, more paternal energy turned out to be exactly what the format needed. It's one of the strangest casting stories in classic television, and it's also completely true. The ship's doctor very nearly wasn't Bernie Koppel either. In that same first pilot movie, the role of the ship's physician was played by Dick Van Patten, a veteran character actor with decades of television and stage experience behind him. Van Patten's performance tested well, and by most accounts the studio genuinely wanted him for the eventual weekly series. But at almost the exact same time, Van Patten had also shot a separate pilot for a family drama about a widowed father raising 8 kids, and that project, 8 is Enough, was picked up as well. Van Patten was suddenly facing a choice no actor wants to make: stay on as a supporting character in an ensemble comedy, or headline his own show as the star. He chose to lead 8 is Enough, and it turned out to be the right call, running for 5 seasons and becoming one of the defining family dramas of the late 70s. His old role on the Love Boat went to his friend Bernie Koppel, who turned Dr. Adam Bricker into a fixture of the series for its entire 9-season run. There was no bitterness between the two men over it. Van Patten actually came back to the Love Boat multiple times over the years as a guest star, happily returning to the ship he'd once helped launch, just not as the Doctor anymore. The bartender audiences remember, the one with the famous double finger point, wasn't the original choice either. In that first 1976 pilot, the role of the ship's bartender, Isaac, went to a respected character actor named Teddy Wilson, who played the character with a sharper, more streetwise edge than the version fans would eventually come to know. The problem, according to the network's own internal notes, wasn't Wilson's talent. It was tone. That first pilot tested as darker and more cynical than ABC wanted for a Saturday night family show built around warmth and escapism, and rather than adjust the writing, the network decided to recast the role entirely for a softer, sunnier version of the bar. Ted Lang got the part instead and turned Isaac Washington into one of the most beloved characters on the ship. Wilson wasn't sidelined for long, though. He went on to build a long, respected career with memorable roles on shows like Sanford and Son, What's Happening?, The Golden Girls, and Good Times, proving that missing out on one hit show doesn't have to define an entire career. The ship's purser in that same original pilot wasn't Fred Grandy's gopher either. It was played by a Groundlings-trained comedic actor named Sandy Helberg, who brought a much more frantic, high-strung energy to the character than the naive, easygoing version audiences eventually got. Once again, ABC wanted the crew to feel like a warm, tight-knit family rather than a group of stressed-out coworkers, and Helberg's more anxious take didn't fit that vision. He was recast when the network ordered a reworked second pilot, and the softer version of the role went to Grandy. Helberg's career barely slowed down. He went on to appear in comedy classics like Spaceballs, This Is Spinal Tap, and History of the World, Part 1, along with guest spots on shows ranging from MASH to Seinfeld. And in a fun bit of Hollywood symmetry, his son Simon Helberg would later find his own sitcom stardom playing Howard Wolowitz on The Big Bang Theory. Even the crew's director's chair went through more turnover than most fans realized before Lauren Tews ever got the job. In that very first pilot, the role belonged to an actress named Terry O'Mara, playing a character named Jerry, who came across as capable but a little too buttoned up and businesslike for what ABC wanted from its Saturday night fantasy. When the network ordered a second pilot movie in 1977 to rework the entire concept, O'Mara was let go, and the search for the right crew's director started all over again. That search led to actress Diane Stillwell, who played a character named Sandy in the second pilot and, by most accounts, was expected to carry the role into the regular series once ABC finally gave the show a full order. But just days before filming on the weekly series was set to begin, producers held one more round of auditions, and a 23-year-old Lauren Tews walked in and blew everyone away. Stillwell was let go before she ever filmed a single episode of the actual series, an incredibly tough break considering how close she came. She kept working steadily afterward, though, picking up recurring and guest roles on shows like Phyllis, Laverne Shirley, and Barney Miller. Captain Steubing wasn't a lock either, even after Ted Hamilton was let go. In the 1977 follow-up TV movie, sometimes called Love Boat 2, the captain's chair went to a respected veteran actor named Quinn Redeker, playing a character called Captain Madison. Redeker played the role with a stern, believable authority, the kind of performance you'd expect from a real merchant marine officer. But that turned out to be exactly the problem. ABC didn't want a strict military commander barking orders. They wanted a warm, fatherly figure who could dole out romantic advice to lonely passengers between ports, and Redeker's more serious take didn't match that tone. He was let go before the series found its permanent captain in Gavin MacLeod, fresh off his run as Murray Slaughter on The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Redeker's career didn't miss a beat either. He built a long, celebrated run on daytime television, playing Alex Marshall on Days of Our Lives and later the iconic Rex Sterling on The Young and the Restless, earning multiple daytime Emmy nominations along the way. He also had a serious career as a writer, sharing an Academy Award nomination for co-writing the story that became The Deer Hunter. And finally, there's Pat Klaus, who had one of the toughest jobs in the entire history of the show, replacing Lauren Tews after her sudden firing in 1984. Rather than simply recasting Julie McCoy, producers introduced Klaus as Judy McCoy, Julie's younger sister, stepping in to take over cruise director duties for the ship's final seasons. Klaus, a former fashion model who'd already found success on the series' airplane spin-off show Flying High, brought her own warmth to the role and helped steady the ship during a genuinely difficult transition, staying with the show through its 8th and 9th seasons. When the weekly series wrapped in 1986 to make way for occasional TV movie specials, several of her castmates came back for reunions. Klaus didn't. She made the unusual choice to leave show business behind entirely and train as a registered nurse, spending decades afterward caring for patients instead of chasing another audition. In an industry full of actors clinging to every last opportunity, walking away entirely, on her own terms, and never looking back, might be the most quietly remarkable exit on this entire list. 9 seasons, 3 pilot movies, and more behind-the-scenes reshuffling than most fans ever knew about. Some of these actors were let go for reasons that had nothing to do with their talent, and everything to do with network executives chasing a very specific tone. Others walked away entirely on their own terms, trading a hit show for Congress, or a soap opera career, or a nursing degree. And at least one departure, Lauren Tews' firing in the middle of her recovery from addiction, still reads today as something the show handled with a lot less compassion than it probably should have. Which one of these stories surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this look behind the curtain of classic television, stick around, because there are a lot more stories like this one still to tell.